Scarlett. Wake up. Don't scare Mom. Family members of the patient. Calm down. The patient is just too tired and will wake up tonight. If you keep making so much noise like this, it will only affect the patient's rest. If you keep making noise, get out. Hearing what the doctor said, that voice immediately laughed and said in a flattering tone, Doctor, I'll be quieter later. Just let me stay here with my daughter. Not hearing a reply from the other side, the surroundings suddenly fell silent. She felt that this situation was a bit familiar and wanted to open her eyes. But her eyelids felt as heavy as 1,000 cat ties and she just couldn't open them. At this moment, that familiar voice came to her ears again. Scarlett. It's not that Mom is scolding you. But what's so good about that Hector? Just looking at his face, you can tell he's a heartless person. Yet you insisted on marrying him. Mom didn't agree. And you even threatened to kill yourself. Do you know how painful it was for Mom to see you like that? After a 2-second pause, that voice softly sounded again. Daughter. A woman should still marry someone who likes her. Don't just choose someone you like. Otherwise, you'll suffer in the future. Sigh. Fortunately, Hattie Fosselblade, you haven't woken up. Otherwise, if you heard Mom say this, you'd definitely think I'm being long-winded again. That voice kept talking in her ears. And as Scarlett listened, tears streamed down her face. This incident also happened in her previous life. But at that time, she was really unconscious because she was too tired from preparing her dowry. So she didn't hear these words at all. At that time, because she was going to marry the person she liked, she was busy every day preparing her wedding clothes, making clothes and shoes for Hector, and also dealing with her work. She didn't have time to listen to so much from her mom. And even later, she got annoyed as soon as she heard her mom speak. Because her mom had always looked down on Hector and often poured cold water on her when she was happily preparing her wedding clothes. Looking back now, the old are indeed more experienced. In the early 1980s, Scarlett and Hector grew up in the same family compound. Their parents were all employees of textile factory No. 1. There was only one child in her family. Since she didn't have playmates, she had deep feelings for Hector, who had taken care of her since they were young. Because Hector had always been very patient with her, she had always thought that Hector felt the same way about her. In 1975, after graduating from high school, Hector couldn't find a job, so his family found a way to send him to the army. And he was away for 3 years. In the first 3 years, they still wrote letters to each other frequently. But later, for some reason, the replies became slower and slower. Although she was sad, she also understood that people would grow up. In the following 2 years, she wouldn't write to him either when she had nothing to do. Although she was sad at that time, she took the college entrance examination in 1977 and was admitted to Beijing Medical University. With her studies as the top priority, she didn't have much time to be sad. Until 1982. That is, last year when she graduated, Scarlett was admitted to Beijing Military Region Hospital and became a military doctor. And she met him again. At that time, Hector was already a deputy battalion commander. After seeing each other again after 7 years, Scarlett only felt that he had become much more upright, and his eyes had also become cold. At that time, she was still sighing that the army was indeed a place that tempered people. But when Hector saw her, his eyes lit up. The moment she saw his eyes, Scarlett's heart beat faster. The Hector 7 years ago was a warm big brother in her heart. And the Hector with sharp eyes and a tall and straight posture 7 years later was the ideal lover image in her heart. Subsequently, Hector began to pursue her. He pursued her openly and vigorously, and the whole military region knew about it. Finally, she fell for him. She ignored the vague reminders from the old military doctors in the hospital and also ignored the occasional pointing and whispering from the family members in the military region family compound. She even thought that she was very assertive and that she was the only one who was awake while everyone else was drunk. Recalling this, her mother's voice came again. Why hasn't she woken up yet? Could it be that you guys misjudged? She'll wake up soon. Don't be anxious. Just wait a little longer. Scarlett tried to open her eyes. Hey, doctor. My daughter's eyes moved. Take a look. Is she about to wake up? At this time, Scarlett's eyes had already opened. Seeing that her daughter had finally woken up, Ivy wept with joy. You naughty girl. Do you know how worried Mom was about you? Do you know how long you've been in a coma? You really scared Mom to death, doctor. Thank you so much. I'm really sorry about last night. I caused you so much trouble. Auntie, I understand you. You two can have a good talk. You can be discharged from the hospital at any time. Just make up for some nutrition after being discharged. Goodbye, Auntie. With that, the doctor walked out and didn't disturb the mother and daughter anymore. Scarlett looked at her mother, who had 1 or 2 white hairs but was still healthy, and couldn't help but throw herself into her arms. Mom, I miss you so much. Seeing that her daughter actually threw herself into her arms and cried like when she was a child, Ivy's heart broke. She didn't say anything and just patted her daughter's back. After a while, Scarlett stopped crying and nestled in her mother's arms and said, Mom, I don't want to marry Hector anymore. Ivy's hand that was patting Scarlett's back stopped. She looked at her daughter and asked anxiously, What's wrong? What happened? Why don't you want to get married all of a sudden? Ivy really didn't think highly of Hector, but now hearing what her daughter said, she was a bit worried. It wasn't that she didn't agree with her daughter not getting married. It was just that her daughter was happily preparing the things for the wedding yesterday, and today she suddenly went back on her word. She was worried that her daughter had something on her mind and didn't tell her. She looked into her daughter's eyes and asked, What exactly happened? Did he do something to sorry you? If Hector really did something to sorry her daughter, it wouldn't be as simple as not getting married. She would definitely go and settle the score with him. There's nothing particularly important. Mom. Before, I was always in an extremely happy mood and didn't notice anything wrong with Hector. When I was sleeping this time, I dreamed of some words that the old military doctors around me and the family members in the family compound had said, and I thought there was something wrong. So I don't want to get married anymore. Mom. I'm 23 years old now. I want to accompany you for a few more years. Okay? Ivy's rough hand stroked her daughter's delicate face and said tenderly, Okay. We'll go to his house to call off the engagement today. Mom will be with you all the time. Scarlett's eyes were moist. She hugged her mother and put her head on her mother's shoulder, thinking to herself, Mom, I will take good care of you in this life. She wiped away her tears, forced a smile, took her mother's hand, and said, Mom, I'm fine now. Let's go back and tidy up, and then go to Hector's family to call off the engagement. Okay. Mom will listen to you. Let's go home first. It was already afternoon when they arrived at Hector's family, because they had called in advance. All the members of Hector's family had taken leave and were at home. Like Scarlett, Hector was on leave at home preparing for the wedding. When he saw Ivy and her daughter come in, he stood up, called out, Auntie, and then sat down. Ivy took out the betrothal gifts given by Hector's family and Hector's horoscope document. Scarlett said straightforwardly, Mom and Dad of Hector, my mom and I came here today to call off the engagement. Before she could finish a sentence, Hector's mother stood up and said anxiously, What's going on? The wedding is tomorrow and everything is ready. Why are you calling off the engagement at this time? What exactly happened? Hector, did you do something to sorry Scarlett? Hector's face darkened, and his eyes fixed on Scarlett like sharp swords as he asked, Scarlett, why are you calling off the engagement for no reason? Did you hear someone say something nonsense? All three parents were confused. Scarlett raised her head and looked into Hector's eyes and said, I just suddenly feel that we're not suitable. What do you mean? Did something happen? Who would say something nonsense? Hector's eyes flickered. Since nothing happened, I don't understand why you want to call off the engagement. And our marriage approval report has already been approved. Isn't it inappropriate to call off the engagement at this time? Although the approval report has been approved, we haven't got the marriage certificate yet. Right? I believe that as long as we want to, this can be solved. If possible, I'll go and talk to the leader for you. No need. But I want to know the real reason. Hector said loudly. You asked me to say it. Don't blame me. I'll just say one name. Violet. The look of annoyance flashed in Hector's eyes. And he still insisted. I don't understand what you're talking about. You just don't want to get married, right? Mom and Dad. There's nothing more to say. If she wants to call off the engagement, then call it off, Scarlett. Don't regret it. After saying that, he slammed the door and walked out quickly. Seeing Hector's reaction, Hector's parents looked at each other and both understood that their son probably had some secrets. So they didn't make things difficult for Scarlett and her mother. They accepted the betrothal gifts they brought and politely sent the mother and daughter out the door. Back at home, Ivy looked at her daughter and hesitated to speak. Seeing her daughter sitting in the living room, quietly drinking water, she finally couldn't resist the curiosity in her heart and asked, "What exactly is going on with that someone you mentioned? What's the relationship between her and Hector?" Then she added, "You don't have to say it if you don't want to. Mom is just curious." There's nothing I can't say. It turned out that about a year after Hector joined the army, he met Violet, a dancer from the art troupe. Violet was charming and attractive, with a plump and sexy figure, and many people in the army liked her. But because she had good conditions, she had very high standards. So she was still single. By chance, Hector saved Violet, who was almost molested by a group of hooligans. Violet fell in love with him at first sight. Violet's father was a staff officer in a regiment in the military region, holding a high position and having great power. So she also had a free and unrestrained and willful personality. And she chased Hector so openly that the whole military region knew about it. It's easier for a woman to pursue a man. Just like that. A month later, they started dating. They had originally planned to submit a marriage application. But Violet's family didn't agree because Hector was only a small squad leader and had only been in the army for a little over a year at that time. Violet resisted, but couldn't withstand the pressure from her family and chose to break up with Hector. Subsequently, her family introduced someone from the Beijing Municipal Government Department to her, and she was married off soon after. Hector was in a gloomy state during that period and it took him a long time to recover. After that, Hector had been working hard. In the following 5 years, he didn't date anyone again. In fact, without the memories of her previous life, Scarlett wouldn't have called off the engagement either. After all, in her opinion, no matter how deep the feelings were, after almost 6 years, they would have been long forgotten. But in her previous life, they officially got married. In the first 2 or 3 years after marriage, they could be considered to treat each other with respect. Although they didn't love each other deeply, they could still get by with their daughter. But 3 years later, Violet's husband cheated on her. And she got a divorce and came back to find Hector in front of her. Hector didn't show any good feelings towards Violet. She thought there was nothing between them. But in the following days, she often couldn't find him when he was on leave, and sometimes he even didn't come home at night. Every time she asked, Hector would tell her that he was having a gathering with his comrades. She sensed that something was wrong. But she was too busy in the hospital. At that time, she was already a deputy director and didn't have the time to care about what was really going on with him. It was not until 3 years later that she accidentally came across Hector's diary. April 28, 1976. Today, I saved a very beautiful girl. When she told me her name, I realized that she was Violet from the art troupe. When I saw her, my heart was pounding so fast. This was the first time the name Violet appeared in Hector's diary. And she was mentioned in every subsequent entry. Half a year later, after being torn apart by Violet's family, he only wrote one sentence, "I will definitely make you regret it." And that was where the diary ended. Until the day he met Scarlett. October 7, 1980 to today, I sent a comrade-in-arms to the hospital and unexpectedly met Scarlett. After not seeing her for several years, she has grown up and become even more beautiful. Many soldiers in the hospital blushed when they saw her. Scarlett is even more outstanding than Violet was 6 years ago. If I were to be with her, would she regret it? And then came the day of her marriage. October 1, 1983. Today I married Scarlett. She specially came from Jing City and secretly gave me a belt as a wedding gift. I saw sadness and disappointment in her eyes. Seeing her like that, I really wanted to hold her in my arms. I also wanted to ask her that since she still had feelings for me in her heart, why didn't she get a divorce? But I was about to get married, so I didn't ask her. Just now, during the wedding night, Scarlett was wooden and uninteresting. Although she was beautiful, she had no soul. Which made me lose interest all of a sudden. She was so lively and cute when she was a child. Why has she become like this? Violet, I miss you. And then, 3 years later, on March 12, 1996, I met Violet again. She was already divorced. Although she was almost 30 years old, she was still so charming and attractive. Since Scarlett was by my side, I rejected her overtures. But when I saw those big, charming eyes filled with tears, my heart ached unbearably. After all these years, only she can still stir up my emotional changes. However, as a soldier, I couldn't betray my family. Violet, I'm sorry. April 23, 1996. Today, I met Violet in the hospital. I sent her home, and we talked for a long time. In the end, Violet hugged me and cried, saying that she regretted it. Seeing her crying like that, I felt so sorry for her and wanted to comfort her. Who would have thought that in the end? We were carried away by our emotions, and I made a mistake. When I put on my military uniform, I felt extremely guilty. I'm sorry for this military uniform I'm wearing. After that, I kept doing it and then regretting it. And then doing it again the next time and regretting it again. It was such a cycle. Until they had a son and a daughter. But when she read up to this point, she couldn't remember how she felt. She seemed to feel a bit of disappointment, sadness, and incredulity. But the feelings that were already not much had been consumed over the past few years and were now very little. She quickly calmed down at that time. And she filed for divorce from Hector. She wrote down the reason for the divorce on the divorce report and then lived alone with her daughter. Until her daughter grew up and she passed away due to illness. She didn't know what happened to Hector in the end. By the time she passed away, Hector had already been discharged from the army for many years. She didn't know anything else and didn't even inquire about it. She stopped talking when she got to the part before the marriage. Seeing that she was a bit down, her mother hugged her and said with a smile, "Our daughter is quite lucky. She found out about him and Violet in advance. This is even better. It's better to stop the loss in time." "That's right. Mom. I'm hungry. Let's cook together." "Okay. My dear daughter." A few days later, Scarlett returned to the military hospital in Jing City. The news that she had broken off her engagement with Hector had spread throughout the entire military region. Everyone looked at her with eyes full of sympathy. It seemed that Hector really hadn't forgotten Violet. Scarlett was so pitiful. With this kind of mentality, Scarlett had received unprecedented attention in the past few days. Everyone spoke to her cautiously, and she felt like a porcelain and all recently. A month later, this matter gradually faded from people's attention, and everything got back on track. Scarlett's medical skills also returned to the level of her previous life. One day, they were doing their daily ward rounds when a military vehicle stopped at the entrance of the hospital. 2 soldiers covered in blood were carried out and rushed into the emergency room. Scarlett and her master were in charge of one of them. This soldier had been shot in the chest and was already unconscious. Her master performed the surgery and she assisted. The whole operation took 3 hours. Fortunately, heading fulfilled the bullet had deviated a bit. And the operation was a success. They successfully saved the soldier. As long as he didn't have a fever that night and stayed in the hospital for a while longer, there would basically be no problem after he recovered. After coming out of the operating room, they realized that the patient next door was Hector. He had been injured in the head by a bomb, and the operation was still not finished. In the afternoon, they went to see the soldier who had been shot. It turned out that he was the famous Leo. Speaking of this person, he had become the regiment commander of a regiment before he was 30 years old this year. With his excellent military skills and strong combat ability, he had won battle after battle. And there was no task that he couldn't complete as long as it was assigned to him. He was the ace of the Beijing military region. She had heard of this person before. It was said that he had a perverse, ruthless, and merciless personality, and his martial arts skills were unrivaled. She had thought that this person should be a big, burly man with a thick back and a large waist. Unexpectedly, his face was quite good-looking, and his figure was not that of an overly muscular man. Instead, it was very well proportioned, looking thin in clothes and having muscles when taking off the clothes. TSK. With such a face. He's almost 30 years old and still doesn't have a girlfriend. How bad must his temper be? She accidentally blurted out what was in her mind. She couldn't help but look around and found that no one was there. She stuck out her tongue and secretly felt relieved. Seeing that this person was okay, she quietly left. But she didn't see that the soldier on the hospital bed opened his eyes the moment she turned around. Leo opened his eyes and only saw a tall and slender figure leaving. Was it her who was talking just now? Hector's operation was also completed. Although the operation was successful, because his head was injured, it was not known whether there would be any sequelae. The next day when she went to work, because she had been worried about that patient, she came early. When she walked into the ward, she felt as if she was being targeted by a wild beast, and her body felt a chill. She touched her arm and walked in. Since this was a seriously injured patient, he had a room to himself. She walked up to the hospital bed, looked at the duty record left by the night shift, and then asked the routine questions. Leo, you're awake. Are you feeling better today? Is there anywhere you feel uncomfortable? The gaze of this person was too aggressive, and she wanted to finish the task quickly and leave the ward as soon as possible. She wasn't sure if it was her illusion, but the vigilance in that person's eyes disappeared when he heard her voice. What's your name? Why haven't I seen you before? Leo asked without answering her question. I've only been here for less than a year. Maybe you haven't seen me. Is there anywhere you feel uncomfortable? Seeing that Leo didn't answer, Scarlett asked again. You answer me first, he said with a somewhat rascally smile. My name is Scarlett. Excuse me, patient, is there anywhere you feel uncomfortable? By now, Scarlett Stone was not very friendly. Seeing that Scarlett was already unhappy, Leo didn't dare to tease her anymore and said seriously. Report to Dr. Scarlett. I, Leo, have no discomfort. Dr. Scarlett's medical skills are excellent. Seeing that he was still in the mood to joke, Scarlett couldn't help but admire him. His recovery ability was really strong. Indeed, a strong person is strong in all aspects. About half a month later, Leo was ready to be discharged from the hospital. In half a month's time, they had also become quite familiar. Through this interaction, she realized that Leo was not like what was rumored. He was humorous, cheerful, and generous. And he was a really nice person. On the day Leo was discharged from the hospital, he specifically found her and handed her a box, saying that it was a thank you gift for her. Before she could react, he left. When she opened it, it was a pearl earring. Since she couldn't catch up with him, she could only put it in the drawer of her desk for now and return it to him when she had a chance in the future. Just as she was thinking about it, Hector walked in wearing a hospital gown. He looked much better, but there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. When she saw him, Scarlett's eyes instantly turned cold. She asked coldly, "What are you doing here?" Hector stared into Scarlett's eyes and asked, "Why did you break off the engagement?" Scarlett was speechless. "Didn't I say the reason for breaking off the engagement that day? We have a personality conflict. This is just an excuse." "What's the real reason?" "Is it because I had a relationship with Violet before? That's the reason." "Why? Isn't this reason valid?" "But our relationship is already in the past. Can the 6 years of our past relationship make you choose to break off the engagement? Who knows if it's really in the past?" "You say it's in the past. But we can't dig out your heart to confirm. Can't I choose not to take this risk?" "Do you know something else?" Hector asked tentatively. "Something else? What else is there between you two?" Scarlett looked as if she really didn't know. Staring into Scarlett's eyes, Hector dispelled his doubts. It seemed that she really hadn't had any strange experiences. The reason why he asked this was that during the few days when he was injured and passed out, he had a dream. In the dream, he had married Scarlett as usual last month. Although he didn't like Scarlett's wooden and uninteresting personality after marriage, she was beautiful and capable. And she brought him a lot of face outside. So he didn't have any other thoughts. In those years, Scarlett took care of everything both at home and outside. And he basically didn't need to worry about anything. They also had a lovely daughter. The daughter looked a lot like Scarlett when she was a child. But she was more lively and willful in personality. Just like Violet. So he doted on his daughter very much. Until 2 or 3 years later, Violet got divorced. And they met again. After meeting several times, he couldn't resist and had a relationship with Violet. In the following year, he couldn't resist Violet's temptation. And at the same time, he couldn't do something like abandoning his wife and daughter. So he was in great pain inside. Until Violet got pregnant and gave birth to a son for him. Scarlett had injured her body when giving birth to their daughter. And she couldn't have any more children after that. He had always regretted not having a son. Violet was indeed the woman he liked. She even gave birth to a son that he had always wanted. So his guilt less and a lot. Later, Violet gave birth to another daughter for him. The daughter was smart and naughty. And very cute. The 3 of them, the mother and the 2 children, brought him warmth. And he couldn't tolerate anyone else in his heart. He originally wanted to file for divorce from Scarlett. But Scarlett saw his diary locked in the cabinet before him and used the diary to apply for a divorce with the leader and took their daughter away. Since he was the one at fault, he, who was already the deputy regiment commander, left the army and was transferred to work in a civilian unit. Later, he learned to do business. But due to an accident, he lost everything. Violet said that he couldn't give her the life she wanted. Took the last bit of money left at home. And left with the 2 children for the south. After that, he set up a pancake stall and raised the 2 children alone. But on his deathbed, Violet came back. She said that neither of the 2 children was his. When he heard this, he died of anger. The dream was long. But he felt as if he had lived a whole life along with it. It was extremely real. The self in the dream made him feel unfamiliar. Yet he knew that it was indeed himself. After seeing Scarlett again, although he wanted to marry her because of her excellence, he really didn't like her being so serious all the time. She was always cold. And no matter what he did, her emotions remained extremely stable. However, he didn't expect that Violet, who had always seemed innocent, lovely, sexy and willful in his impression, turned out to be vain and had no bottom line. Scarlett had always liked him. Even after divorcing him in the dream, she didn't remarry. He believed that if he treated her well in the future, she would change her mind. Thinking like this, Hector felt much more relaxed. After Hector left, Scarlett fell into deep thought. Hector was very strange today. And the questions he asked were also off. After thinking carefully, what was the thing between him and Violet that she shouldn't have known about? That's right. It could only be something that happened after they got married. But judging from his words, did he know about it? Since she could be reborn, it was also possible for him to know those things because of some opportunities. Forget it. Never mind. Anyway, hadn't fulfilled my incession. She had nothing to do with him anymore no matter what. After work, she took her lunch box and went to the cafeteria with her master. She ate slowly. When she was halfway through, her master had already finished and left. After her master left, someone sat opposite her after a while. She looked up and saw that it was Leo. She called out Leo's name and then continued eating. Leo ate very quickly. But he didn't look messy at all. It could be seen that he had a good family education. When she finished the remaining food, Leo had already finished eating a long time ago. They washed the lunch boxes together. On the way, seeing that Leo kept looking at her but not speaking, Scarlett stopped. Leo, and what do you want to talk to me about? Leo touched the back of his head a little embarrassedly and asked, do you like that earring? Only then did Scarlett remember that the earring was in the office. And she couldn't return it this time either. She said, it's very pretty. But the earring is too precious. It's our duty as doctors to treat the sick and save lives. And we shouldn't accept gifts. I'll bring it to you next time. Leo's bright eyes drooped all of a sudden. And Scarlett was surprised to see it. The things I give away and get back are not worth much. I bought it because I thought you would look good wearing it. If you don't want it, just throw it away. Scarlett thought to herself that he was really persistent. As they were approaching the dormitory door, Scarlett said goodbye to him. She turned around and was about to enter when Leo's voice sounded. Scarlett. I like you, and hope you can be in a relationship with me. Before Scarlett could react, he had already taken big steps away. Looking at his leading back, Scarlett didn't know whether to laugh or cry. What's wrong with him? The next day in the cafeteria, she met Leo again. He brought his food over but didn't eat. He just stared at Scarlett. Scarlett's heart raced and her face blushed from being stared at. She said "Kukathai. Aren't you going to eat? If you don't eat, others still want to." Leo stared at her steadily and said, "Do you have an answer to the question I asked last night?" After saying that, his Adam's apple rolled and his ears turned red. Scarlett didn't want to play tricks on him either. She smiled and asked, "Yesterday? What question?" Seeing the smile on her face, Leo resumed his usual casual look. He stared straight at her and said, "The question of Leo wanting to be in a relationship with you." Seeing the mischievous smile on his face, Scarlett's face turned red instantly. She lowered her head and answered in a low voice. "I don't know," Leo said anxiously. "How could you not know? If there's anything you're not satisfied with about me, just tell me and I'll change it." Seeing that Leo's face turned red with anxiety, Scarlett gently wrote two characters in the water on the dining table, "Willing," and then ran away in a flash. Looking at those two characters, Leo sat in the cafeteria alone and giggled for a long time. In the following days, Leo came to pick her up and sent her off every day when she went to and from work. And every time he sent her to work, he wouldn't come empty-handed. He would send her all kinds of famous snacks, candies and chocolates from Beijing in turn. The consequence of being so high profile was that everyone around them knew they were in a relationship, and she was often teased by her colleagues and patients in the hospital when she was at work. 3 months later, after notifying his family, Leo submitted a marriage application. This time, the preparations for the marriage were completely different from last time. As soon as it was a rest day, Leo would doctor her to the department store, the friendship store, and they went to almost all the places that sold things in Beijing. Soon, let out a low sigh. The wedding day arrived, which happened to be Valentine's Day in later generations. The wedding was extremely lively, with many distinguished guests present. Many of their colleagues were there, and Hector was among them. Looking at the extremely beautiful bride in a form-fitting red dress, Hector realized that the dull and wood girl next door in his eyes could also be so charming and attractive. Since he heard that they were in a relationship, he had thought about snatching her back. But once when he was waiting for her at the hospital gate, he met Leo, who was also waiting for her to get off work. Seeing Leo's teasing eyes, he couldn't help but run away. Later, during a training session, Leo specifically challenged him and beat him until his face was covered in injuries. He could only wait for an opportunity. But every time he had a chance to see Scarlett, Leo would appear. After being beaten several times, he stopped looking for Scarlett. Now, seeing the beautiful couple that they made, he understood that he had lost her forever in this life. After the guests left, Leo pulled Scarlett's hand and went up to the bedroom on the second floor. As soon as he closed the door, he pressed Scarlett against the door and covered her mouth that he had been dreaming about for a long time. While taking off his military uniform, he led Scarlett and fell onto the soft big bed. After a while, the little wife pressed under him struggled, and his mouth left hers. Seeing the little woman's wet eyes beneath him, he lost his mind instantly, and his hand reached for the little woman's skirt. Throughout the night, the red waves surged, and the Mander and X moaned softly. When it was almost dawn, Leo looked at his beautiful wife with slightly red eyes in his arms and kissed her hand affectionately, saying, "Scarlett, I will be with you for the rest of my life." The woman in her sleep slapped him on the face, turned over and continued sleeping. Looking at her lovely appearance, Leo left a lip print on the back of her neck before getting out of bed to wash up. 50 years later, A silver-haired old lady was sitting in the pavilion in the garden to enjoy the cool. An old general in a military uniform hugged her from behind and said gently, "Why are you sitting here? The wind is strong here. Be careful of catching a cold." The old lady turned around, looked at her husband whose face was already full of wrinkles, touched his face and stared at him affectionately, saying, "I'm thinking that the happiest thing that happened to me in my life was meeting you." "Me too,"